Ladies and gentlemen, our pleasure to welcome Mr. Peter Cushing.
Thank you very, very much indeed. Have you been here all night? I was.
Peter, not only have you connected with the Hammer films, this sort of recent success story, but before that you spent a long time working in television, before that on the classical stage with the Old Vic Company, and before that as a film actor in Hollywood. Just how far back do you trace your first interest in acting?
Noah, I think. Right back. Before I even knew I wanted to be an actor, my great hero was Tom Mix. Anyone remember Tom Mix? He was sort of the John Wayne, I suppose, of my boyhood. And I was always going to the cinema to see him, coming home and reacting some of the deeds of daring do that he did. And I didn't realize it was wanting to be an actor. I just wanted to be a cowboy, not an engine driver, as most young people did. So it was really, then when I grew a little older, I realized this was what I wanted to be, but I had no training for it and no connections. But if you want my life story, it's going to take about 5 sessions of this.
But you didn't go directly into acting?
No, I got a job which was called surveyor's assistant. But I was really a glorified office boy for about 4 years at the Colston and Purley Urban District Council, where has someone been there? They were so patient, and I think, because all I did, I was determined by then, I knew I wanted to be an actor by that time, and I was determined to do something about it. And so I joined amateur theatricals. I still played the lead in the school plays. But of course, all rehearsals, you had to have time to rehearse. But of course, the council had different ideas of what I should do with my time. But I knew that there was a big loft in these offices where all the old ordnance maps were kept. And I suggested, of course they were in an awful muddle, I said, could I go up there each day and put them in order? And they thought, jolly good idea. So I used to go up to this marvellous loft and learn my parts and rehearse, and of course no ordnance map that remained in this terrible condition, but I had all this wonderful time to learn parts and study them. And also I used to take a publication called The Stage and answer advertisements in that, and eventually I did. It sounds easy now, but it did take an awful long time really to crack into the business. I tried for so long, it seemed to me a long time, with my own name, that I thought a change of name might help. And I was in the throes of first love, and the word darling was naturally used an awful lot. So I thought, right, I'll call myself Peter Ling, cut out the dar, you see. And so I sent off a whole lot of letters to all the repertory companies saying, here I am, what about it, or words to that effect. And I soon changed my name back to Peter Cushing because I got a letter from one of them saying, I don't think there's much scope for Chinese actors in the repertory group. So I quickly changed that. But eventually, I expect you've all know Bill Fraser, who became so famous as Bootsy and Snudge and so many things since then. He ran the Worthing Repertory Company. And I wrote to him, I bombarded him for months and months and months. And at last I got a letter saying, please come down and see me. So I immediately gave him my notice at the office, to their delight. And I arrived, baggage packed, at the Connaught Theatre and presented myself to Mr. Fraser, who was taking tea in his dressing room, and he said, who are you? And I said, Peter Cushing. He said, oh, I'm so glad you've turned up. And I thought, right, this is it. And he said, it was just to ask you, please don't keep on writing to me, because I've got so much else to do than try and answer letters. Whereupon I think I burst into tears, and he took compassion upon me and put me on the stage that very night. They were doing a play by Priestley called Cornelius, in which there was a scene with a lot of creditors. And in repertory, you don't have a lot of extra people around. You haven't got enough money. And so he was very glad to just have an odd bod in the background, looking as though he was dunning the leading part for some money was there. And I appeared, made my first professional, because you become a professional as soon as you're paid. So I reckon I became a professional. What was that? All of, gosh, how many years ago? I can't work it. I won't believe that. Someone might ask me later, and I'll try and work it out.
But as you say, the Connaught Theatre has given us a lot of fine actors. You mentioned Bill Fraser. It does seem that from from Worthing to Hollywood is rather a large jump, which is exactly the jump you took.
Yes, not
How did that come
quite.
about?
I went to several. I was in repertory for about 3.5 to 4 years, all over the country. But coming back to Tom Mix again, I'd always wanted to go to where Tom Mix lived, which was America. And I saved up a certain amount of money in those 3.5 to 4 years. I think it was about £50, which meant an awful much more than it does today. And my dear father paid my fare one way. It always bothered me a bit. I think he thought I could swim home, perhaps. But I think it was economy, really. Because it was the only way, bless his heart, that he felt he could help me. He was a businessman, my father. He was a quantity surveyor, which has nothing to do with the theatre. And all he could do, I think, was financially to think, well, the boy wants to go there, this I can do for him, which he did. And that was really a case of the biggest fool stepping in where every angel would fear to tread. But because of being a fool,
But you had no introductions at all to any casting offices? No invitations to go?
No, oh no. No, no one knew of me. But I'd sort of planned it. I'd worked out my economics with my £50. I went straight to the YMCA in New York and looked up all the addresses of the film companies in the telephone directories, their offices in New York, and went round to see them, saying, look, I've just arrived from England, very famous actor. And there was one, they were all awfully kind, but there was one gentleman whose name was Larney Goodkind, and he really did live up to his name. He was so helpful, and he said, well, if you're determined to go out to the coast, which was always the expression, like going up west, so the coast was to go to Hollywood, he said, don't have too much hopes, but I will give you a letter of introduction, which he did, which I forget if anything came of it, but at least he gave this wonderful encouragement. I think one must always, we all need encouragement at all times in our lives, and whether you think the person is going to make it or not, you must encourage, I think, because if something is latent in that person, you can't just down it and say, no, 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 you've got to. And this one person did. You only need one person to give you that little bit of extra courage and determination.
Your first film was The Man in the Iron Mask, where in fact you rush on in armour saying a messenger is without.
Yes, the king wants to see you, I said in a quavering voice.
But you did more than that in the film, in fact. You did a number of scenes with Louis Hayward. What were those?
This is one of those extraordinary, lucky breaks that come. You see, I knew no one at all in Hollywood, but I went round, having again landed at the YMCA in Hollywood, and announced that I was going to get into the pictures, to which they said, oh yeah, or words to that effect. And I said, I've got no money, because I hadn't by then, it had all gone. I said, but could I stay with you until I've got a job, and I will pay you. And they were so absolutely astounded. They said, yes. But anyway, I whipped around to all the film studios, and here it's extraordinary. You can go to any studio, don't do this, for heaven's sake, and don't quote me, but you can go practically to any studio in England, really just walk through the gates and put a bomb and blow the whole place up. Don't do it to Sheraton or anything like that. But in America, you go to the gates and there are armed policemen bristling with guns, sticking out their ears and their belts. And I think it was something to do with being frightfully British. At that time, they really didn't quite get us at all. I don't think they do now. But, I just made something to be inherently honest. I just said, I've come to get into pictures, and I must see someone. Who do I see? So this one in particular said, well, you go and see the casting man, Mr. So-and-so. And he let me through. When I look back, this was quite extraordinary. There's absolutely no reason why he should have done. As I say, this was just the doors. One door closes, another door opens, and here was one that opened completely for me. And I went in to see this casting man, and he said that James Whale was about to direct The Man in the Iron Mask, starring Louis Hayward, in which Louis Hayward played twins, a good brother and an evil brother, and the director was looking for somebody who could play opposite Louis Hayward in this split-screen process to give him something to play against, because it's very difficult for, say, a tennis player. You must have another tennis player to play with. And normally, for that, they would have a continuity girl or somebody just blindly reading the script with sort of nothing more than just saying the lines. So he wanted someone who could sort of act with Louis Hayward. And to cut a very long story short, I got this job, which was absolutely wonderful, because it's a very different, I don't really like the word technique, but film acting is much more technical, really, than any other medium. And I'd only had these 3.5 to 4 years experience in repertory. But I got this job of playing opposite Louis Hayward in all the split-screen work. Whenever he was playing opposite himself, I played the good brother and he played the evil, then we swapped position. And then the film was literally cut up the middle. My two lots were thrown away and Louis Hayward was stuck together. And there was Louis Hayward talking to himself, poor chap. I do it all the time. But it was a wonderful experience because I'd never stepped inside a film studio before. I was able to watch remarkable, you might not have heard of any of them now, but at their time they were very big people like Joseph Schildkraut, Joan Bennett, Alan Hale, Warren William, marvelous contract players, to watch how they worked and indeed, to use the word I don't like, the technique which is used. And I was quite dreadful because I was allowed to go and see the rushes, which helped a great deal. That is, I'm sure you all know what rushes are. It's the next day. You see the previous day's work, so you see that it's all right. And I nearly fainted on the spot when I saw myself. I still do, but then it was just fearful. I had a voice like this, you know. And I was round as a dumpling and sort of terrible. But as the weeks went by, it did improve a little. And indeed, they were very pleased with me and gave me this part. I remember I got on a horse and came rushing up and saying, "The king wants to see you." But I was always one for detail. And I loved period costume. And it was a period of Louis was the 14th, when it was all very lovely big hats and feathers and lovely spurs with rowels this big. So I went to the costumiers and wanted to have these because I remember hearing sort of Tom Mix clanking, that lovely noise when they come. And I thought, well, they clanked surely in those days as well as in the Western period. I leapt on this horse, having never been on a horse before. I used to use Mother's bicycle as Tom Mix's horse. And the thing took off. And pulled down all the scenery. I had a strap across here which held a sort of a sabre-tache, I think it's called, and one across here which held the sword. They both fell down and pinioned my arms. My feet, the stirrups were great big, like armchairs you put your feet. They were locked. So there I was, and all the horse owner, didn't worry a bit. He kept yelling, "Mind my horse!" He was tearing the, and at the end of that they lassoed the horse and me and brought it to a standstill, having held the whole production up for several hours, I should think, cost us several $1,000s. And I was de-spurred on the spot. No one would ever have noticed the spurs but me, but I always look back with a certain amount of, it was shown recently on television, incidentally, and one wonderful thing, to let the audiences know where we were, there was a lovely galloping along, you passed a signpost saying, "To the Palace, Luxembourg." And there I was, and I looked immediately, no spurs, I thought. Oh. But it was a marvellous intro into films and a wonderful experience which rarely comes to any actor to get that sort of experience in filming with people of that calibre and to learn a great deal, which I did. It was soon after that came, I think, one we're going to see.
Vigil in the Night, indeed, with Carol Lombard. Can you tell us a little about that before we see the clip from it?
Yes. By then, war had broken out in England, and I won't tell you all about that side. There's obvious reasons why I didn't get back at that time. I didn't get back to 1942. And they were having great difficulty, all the young people, or the Vigil in the Night, the piece you're going to see, was an all-English cast, you see. It was from an A.J. Cronin story. his usual stories about hospitals and doctors.
It's set in London but made in Hollywood.
Set in London, indeed, and in the north. And this is really one of the reasons how I came to get the job. Robert Coote, whom I'm sure many of you know of and have seen, he played, for instance, Pygmalion's friend in My Fair Lady. He was in Hollywood and had been for many years. And for this film, he had the wonderful title of dialectician. And they wanted an actor who could sort of assume a North Country accent, which everyone could understand, you see, including Americans, because Americans, I think they have now got a little more attuned to the English accent. See, we in England are very attuned to the American accent because we had such an influx of their films. We got used to hearing these extraordinary Bronx and new southern accents, whereas English voices, I think, is a different timbre, how do you say that word? Timbre already. Something about our voices that they had great difficulty in finding. They wanted someone anyway who could sort of put on a sort of a North Country that would be understood and accepted in this country, plus in America. And that was really one reason, apart from the dearth of young actors, I got this really what was virtually the second lead, which was absolutely fantastic. And I think I haven't seen this, mind you, since, and this is what, going back 1940?
39.
39. Well, I'm no good at arithmetic, but that is good, what, 30 years, is it? Is it 30? Plus. Giving the age away, aren't I? Right. And I had learnt a little, I think, I must have. I think I was better than I was of the Man in the Iron Mask, which no one ever saw, the bits they cut away. I mean, so this was really, really great, because Brian Aherne played the leading part opposite Carol Lombard, and I had what was virtually the second male lead opposite Anne Shirley.
But in the scene we're going to see, Anne Shirley, your wife, has just died in an epidemic, and you're taking it out on her sister, Carol Lombard.
What a beast.
What a beast. Without very much of an accent.
Well, stress, I'll try and do better next time.
Can we see the clip from Vigil in the Night?
What a very beautiful, lovely person Carol Lombard was.
Wasn't she?
That was the first time she'd ever played a dramatic role. She was a great one for comedies. Dear, dear person, because that was her penultimate film. In the next film she made, which was To Be or Not to Be with Jack Benny, she was killed in the air crash. Yes, she had about 2 more days to film, I think. She was a dear, dear person. I didn't hear much accent, did you?
No, if anyone wants to hear more accent, it's showing at 8:45 tonight here.
I thought the quality of it, when you think it's very old, it's jolly good.
Indeed. You came back to England quite soon after the Hollywood years and started work in the theatre quite extensively, and I believe with Laurence Olivier in the Old Vic Company. Can you tell us something about the Old Vic Company in those days and how it led up to the film of Hamlet, which is our next extract?
Yes, it's jumping an great gap. Let me think. Yes. Yes, I arrived back in 1942, didn't I? Then there was I joined Ends. So I'm sorry to sort of talking to myself a bit, but you can hear, can't you? Do you like me to do it with a North Country accent? Now, Hamlet was made, what, 1945, 46?
Roughly, yes.
Yes, it was one of the very first films to be made after the war, because there's very little filmmaking during the war. Yes. There was an old man, no there wasn't, there was a theatre called the Kew Theatre down near Chiswick, which no longer exists. But in those days it was a great place for actors to go. You got about £8 a week, which wasn't a great deal, but it was a marvellous shop window, and when you were out of work, or resting, which is a much nicer expression, you could go there quite often and do a play and possibly be seen. But I was in a play down there called While the Sun Shines, playing a Frenchman. Now, I can't speak a word of French, but my beloved wife spoke many languages, and she used to teach me absolutely wonderfully to speak French. Because I remember once, I'm sorry to jot about, but I was given a part later to play a part in a play on television called Asmodee. And A, I couldn't afford to turn things down, and A, I didn't like to. But this I felt I couldn't do, and I said to Helen, "Oh, this is impossible." And with her usual absolute insight and brilliance, she said, "Peter, dear, I think the trouble with you is you're thinking of this part as an Englishman. Now think of him as a Frenchman, and you'll get him," because she was absolutely dead right. She was born, you see, in St. Petersburg and in Russia, and she spoke about 5 languages, and French was just like her native tongue to her. Anyway, she taught me this French part. I'm getting it all muddled. Just prior to this, I'd been to see Laurence Olivier, as he was then, because he was casting a play called Born Yesterday. I expect you saw the film fairly recently. Well, it was a fairly recent film with William Holden and Judy Holliday. And they wanted a young man to play the part that William Holden did. This was for the stage version. So I went to see him about it, and he said, "Of course, you know this is American. Can you speak American?" I said, "No." And he said, "You've been to America." And I said something fatuous like, "Yes, but I've got my boots on at the moment. I'm not walking. It doesn't necessarily mean that because I've been to America, I can speak American." And I think there's nothing more phony than an Englishman trying to speak American. And he said, "Well, that's awfully honest of you, and it saves, see, this inherent honest, be honest. See where it's got me." He said, you're saving us an awful lot of time and yourself, but we will be in touch." And I thought, well, that's just a very kind way of saying ta-ta. But sure enough, then came this cue thing when I was playing this part of a Frenchman. And Tony Bushell, who was Laurence Olivier's right-hand man, it came down. I didn't know he was down. He came to see this play, and apparently went back to Olivier and said, "There's the most incredible Frenchman in this play whom I recognize. So come and have a look at him." So they did. They both came down to the Saturday matinee or something, and Olivier said, "Well, that's that chap who came and said he can't speak American. He can certainly speak French. Obviously, he's a linguist." So, and so that's how he came and said, "Well, this is extraordinary," because it said, "Tony Bushell thought you were a Frenchman. You'd only been in the office a few months before. Would you like to play in the film of Hamlet that I'm making? And what part would you like to play?" So I said, "Well, what about Hamlet?" And he said, "That's cast." So nothing daunted, I said, "Well, what's going? What's there?" And he said, "Well, everything is cast except Osric, who is the court jester. We are having a bit of trouble with this part." They said, "Would you?" And I said, "I would love to play it." And this is awful muddled story, but did you get the gist? That's how I got this part, which was absolutely remarkable. And it's extraordinary when you think today's styles. I've got the sort of skin that doesn't take very kindly to having things stuck on it. I come out in awful blotches, which is not only very unpleasant, but you do whole production up. So whenever I have to wear any sort of hair or stubble or moustaches, I always grow it if I've got time. If I haven't got time, I just have to leave it off because I can't wait. But with this, I knew there was ample time to grow my hair. And of course, it's rather like many of the young people today. It was right down here, which I grew, plus this little moustache and this thing, which I grew. But at the time, you see, I was sort of one alone. One alone. Oh, that's a good title for a song, isn't it? And I was chi-iked unmercifully. And at that time, I think the film of Paganini with Stuart Granger was out, and all the kids were yelling, "Oh, Paganini, where's your violin?" Because all this hair hanging there. And Olivier had his hair dyed. His idea it was the first film, I think, of Hamlet that was being made for many, many years, and he thought the way to do it was to give everyone a more or less conventional idea, like the king always rather looked like the king on the playing cards. You always thought of Ophelia almost in a knight's shift, and you always think of Hamlet as a fair-haired man in black. So he had his hair dyed and cut in this little fringe. And when the film was over, he said, it's an extraordinary thing. He said, you and I with our own hair, we're the only two who look as though we're wearing wigs. So perhaps we'll see now.
Well, after the clip, we'll come on, obviously, to the Hammer years and be asking for some questions from the audience.
Jolly good. Have them ready.
Please do. But first of all, Osric and Hamlet. Just before we take questions from the audience, could you briefly, Peter, fill in the rather large gap between Hamlet and Frankenstein?
Briefly?
Very briefly, yes.
No, for a short answer. It is awfully difficult, really, in a few words.
But tell us first, then, how
well, of course,
how
I
you first came
did
to Hamlet's attention.
yes, because from that I went to Australia with the Old Vic tour with Olivier. Then, cutting very long stories short, I did get into television, and at that time, which was my first television appearance was in 1951. Now, about that time, as very much as opposed to today, because television was really keeping people away from the cinema, people connected with the cinema were not very keen on anyone to do with television. Yes, I suppose they really were. It wasn't jealousy, but I mean, naturally, they wanted business. At any rate, there was only one person, as I did 3 years solid television, and there was only one person who had always wanted me, and that was James Carreras, who was and still is the head of Hammer Pictures. Now, their policy, and they still do it, before the advent of television, they used to make films of radio programs like PC-49, perhaps I'm sure many of you don't remember that, and Life with the Lions, these programs that were on the wireless, they would make films of. And then they started their sort of films by doing the Quatermass Experiment taken from the television series. And they still do, as I'm sure you know. They make On the Buses and all these other things from television. And about the one company who, plus their other kind of pictures, had this remarkable insight to make a picture which might only last for that particular period, as opposed to the so-called horror pictures, which seem to have an audience and go on, because they are not dateable, really, because they're nearly all period pieces anyway. And he was the one person who wanted me. But for 3 years solid, I was so tied up with television, I couldn't accept anything from him. And then I read, and also at that time, I remember Hammer films as called, what were they called?
Exclusive.
Exclusive. And they weren't really very good pictures. In fact, I remember being in cinemas with people yelling, "Take it off, it's British." And some of those were these kind of pictures. And I thought, well, if I was very keen to get into pictures in England, because films are the things I'd always wanted to be, and hence my sojourn to Hollywood. And I thought, well, you want to get in a better type of picture, otherwise you might not get on from there. But when I read that they were going to make Frankenstein again, I remember seeing it with Colin Clive playing Frankenstein and Boris Karloff playing the monster, and being enthralled by it, and directed, of course, by James Whale, who was the man who gave me my first job in Hollywood. And I thought, well, now, Carreras has been asking me all this time, and this is something I'd love to play. So I asked my dear agent if he could arrange for me to see something that Hammers had made recently. And they showed me X the Unknown, which I thought was splendid. Brian Don Levy, I think. Yes. Excellent. It was shown recently on television. And I thought it was so good that I said, well, if they want me, this is the part I'd love to play. And this is how it all happened. And the first Frankenstein picture, Curse of Frankenstein, we're seeing a clip later, and those who were here in the early hours saw it last night. That picture, no one connected with it had any idea that this incredible snowball would start and go on rolling to this very day. It was just another picture in a list of pictures they were going to make that year. And it just struck some chord amongst audiences, which we're still hearing the twangs, which is...
Let's see if we hear any twangs now from the audience. Are there any questions, Mr. Cushing? No.
You've just, it says on this list, you've just finished making Dracula is Dead and Well and Living in London.
Yes, we've cut that title by half, but...
What are you doing now?
I'm talking to you. Do you know, I have, I was telling dear David, for 18 months I've been so incredibly lucky, and it was manifestly an answer to prayer for very personal reasons. I needed desperately to work. Do you know, I haven't stopped up until about 10 days ago. I feel so neglected now. To tell you, I didn't stop doing these, working in pictures for 18 months. And these last 10 days seem to be very, very long. No, at the moment I am resting. But there are some good plans coming up, I hope. Sorry? There are, in case you didn't hear, the question was, are any films lined up? Well, in this incredibly unpredictable business of ours, the answer is always yes, but with a big query mark after it, because there are so many slips between many cups and many lips, but there are some very exciting projects, and I just hope they'll come off, and I have a feeling they will. But at the moment, I couldn't say, yes, I'm starting, as I could have done. If you had asked me about 5 weeks ago, I could have said, oh, yes, I'm starting so-and-so on Monday or Tuesday. So it's a pity I wasn't here then.
What I'd like to know, when you made the film with Louis Hayward, you know, the Man in the Iron Mask, when you played the double part, you were actually on the screen in a lot of that film, really.
Oh, bless you. Did you all hear that question? The lady was wondering, when I did the film of The Man in the Iron Mask with Louis Hayward, did I appear on the screen with him? The answer is no, because they literally, it was rather like David and I playing the scene, and David's playing both parts, playing me and him. Impossible, of course. Let's imagine that. And then he plays David and I play Peter. Then we change places, reverse the parts, and then both of me is cut up the middle and thrown away, and two Davids are stuck together, so that you've got David playing opposite himself as a twin, you see. That is a technical process. Yes, well, this is a technical process. After all these years, I really don't know, but and of course they have improved this technique since it has been used since, where a person plays a twin, nearly always a twin. It has. Can you think of any other pictures where they've used it? I know it has been done a great deal,
yes.
but no, I didn't appear. Fairbanks, did you? Well,
yes,
Fairbanks Senior
so,
or Junior? Mm.
Senior.
But no, the only time I actually appeared in that film was this famous scene when I rush up on a horse, saying the famous line, "The king wants to see you," and I fell off, I think.
You might have long shots of you in it, you know, and then afterwards they sort of just do the close up to the face.
Oh, bless you, no.
The question on the front.
Cushing, what are your recollections of Laurel and Hardy?
What are your recollections of Laurel and Hardy? You made a chump at Oxford with
Yes, indeed.
very early on.
Oh, wonderful people, because they were the film version of Morecambe and Wise. But it's a strange thing with Morecambe and Wise, and with not strange, but it is extraordinary in a way that Morecambe, the sort of the thin and tall one, and Stan Laurel, the little tiny one, they were the sort of the brains of the teams. Not that Hardy or Wise are dim by any means, but they're the ones who thought up all the gags and all the ways to do things. And Hardy, the fat one, who was very happy-go-lucky, a dear person, and he would leave it all to Stan and say, when you're ready, I will do it as you would like me to. Mind you, I was in a very minor capacity when I did this picture. I was merely one of the Oxford dons where these two marvellous chumps come to get their education. I didn't really have much to do in it. And my recollection, I was sort of admiring the tremendous way. See, there's a very, very true saying that comedy is a very serious business, and most comedians, you'll find, are in a way very unfunny off screen and very unsure themselves, because what might make them laugh might not make you as an audience laugh, and this is the thing you've always got to judge with comedy, with everything else, but particularly with comedy. And I was very interested to watch these very heated discussions that went on. And I remember once they had a very, very hard and long day, and the director said, well, go home now. I've got an overhead shot that I want to do of you two, the two chumps, Laurel and Hardy, in the maze at Hampton Court. And they had a camera up in the flies looking straight down on those two figures trying to find their way out of this maze. And they got two doubles to do it, a fat double and a thin double. And the next day, Laurel and Hardy went to see the rushes of this scene. And they said, we've got to do that all again ourselves, because these two chaps doubling it are trying to be funny and are totally unfunny, because they were trying to be funny. So you can't try to be funny, you've just got to be funny. You can't put down a banana skin and trip on it to be funny. The banana skin's got to be there for a reason, and you slip on it without knowing it's there. And this was interesting, that they said, whether we stay late or not, we must redo that scene. And this was the sort of thing one noticed, sitting very far back in a corner, shivering in my shoes. I was so excited. But a great pair. And it is a funny thing, a strange life, this 80, isn't it? Those two who gave such enormous pleasure, did an enormous amount of work, and yet both of them died absolutely penniless, and not forgotten ever, but strange. Might happen to me. You never know.
Cheerful.
Oh, well. Doesn't
Question over there.
Did you regret not making more Sherlock Holmes films, or do you prefer television?
Did you regret not making more Sherlock Holmes films, or did you prefer the television?
The only medium I like is filming, for many reasons which I'll discuss later if you like. But I preferred doing the film of Sherlock Holmes, again, because I like the medium. I mean, I would like to do him again if I'm not too old on the screen, or films for television, but not as a television series.
How many times did you play him in all?
I played the one film,
Yes.
and I did, there were 16 episodes, we did 15, because The Hound of the Baskervilles, which we also did for the BBC, was in 2 parts, but we did 15 of the 60 stories. I think the trouble for me, I believe and understand from the many letters and people I've met, that they liked the BBC series very, very much indeed. But to me, those that I saw, it's not Peter Cushing doing his best to be the character of Sherlock Holmes. It's Peter Cushing just being relieved that he's got his lines out. Because what had happened, you see, we were given 9 months to get these 16 episodes done. That would be about 10 days for each. Well, that's ample, that's fine, providing you get the scripts in time to do your study and all your work and reference. But what they had not allowed for, and you see, by the time we had made about 6, they had already started being shown each week on television, so we were all the time having to keep ahead so that they wouldn't have a gap in showing them. And they had not allowed for the English weather, and nearly every one of the 16 had location work. Well, you've got to have continuity in weather. If you shoot one day in the sun and it's immediate continuity the next day, you've got to have the same sort of weather. Well, of course, you know what our climate is. I mean, you'd have it sun shining and you're perspiring in your tweeds, and the next day it's so cold you're bringing all the brass monkeys in. They had not allowed for this, and in the end we were doing them in 3 days, which to me is impossible. And that's to me what showed in the television series. This terrible pressure of time. I can't work like that. So the answer is I prefer doing the films.
A question on the centre here.
This is somebody presenting an obvious question. Will you please tell me when was your first meeting with Christopher Lee in Hamlet?
My first meeting with Christopher Lee was in 1956 in his makeup as the monster. So when he took it off at lunchtime, I screamed my head off. No, it is actually true. I did meet him because he was down to have a test for that makeup, and that was really how I met him.
Another question.
Would you agree that the current trend in horror films is now getting to be rather more stomach turning and spine chilling? You know, we all go, yeah.
come up here and do that. That's right. Yeah. I think all films, almost regardless of their content, do reflect the age we live in, and perhaps we are living in a yuck age. I do know what you mean. I think scriptwriters have a great difficulty in really writing a variety on the same theme. But you see, if you see a film, say like The Godfather, an absolutely marvellous film, but we've seen all this before, the usual gangsters and shooting and blood spurting out. And you go and see, were you sort of referring really to a film like, say, a Frankenstein or a Dracula?
Yes.
This is perhaps one of the problems and why one is so amazed that there's still an audience for these pictures, because you see, once you've made the original Frankenstein story or the original Dracula story, one is about a man who does the impossible, and that is create a living being, and the other is about a vampire who lives on blood. Really, you're telling the same story every time you make one, the same as really a good Western is always the goodie after the baddie, isn't it? I know we now get the baddie was also sort of the anti-hero, so that's just another sort of variation on the same theme. But this is, I don't think they really have changed that all that much, or do you think there is a bit more tomato ketchup flying around? Yes, but you've seen it before. In the, what was it, the one with Freddie Jones and Simon Ward. Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed. We were mucking around with brains there. You see. And you see, the strange thing is, when we first started these, back in 1956, everything that old Frankie got up to was pretty impossible. But now Dr. Barnard has caught up with. Now, she hasn't got quite as far as me, because I have transplanted brains, not very successfully, but we've all got to start somewhere. But they'll be at it yet, they'll do it. They'll be at it the same as they will find a cure for cancer, which reminded rather a lovely thing, apropos of absolutely nothing at all, but I read somewhere that a little girl came home covered with mud, and her mother said, "Where have you been?" She said, "Playing in the mud, Mummy." "What is mud for?" And Mummy thought quickly and said, "Oh, to make bricks, dear." So the child said, "What are bricks for, Mummy?" And Mummy said, "Well, to make houses." And the child said, "Well, what are houses for?" And I said, "Well, for people." Then the child asked the impossible question to answer, "What are people for?" Well, I think here's the answer, that people are here. Some of us are here to entertain. Dr. Barnard and people of his like are really going to find cures for these things. They are going to be able to transplant brains. In fact, I believe Russian scientists have done that very thing in animals, dogs, I believe, quite successfully. But I think, I wonder if you are particularly, because I must say this one revolted me a little, because it was not, we didn't see it at the Rushes. Did you see Tales from the Crypt? There is a scene there in the sequence. It's 5 stories linked together. And there's a scene in there where Richard Green is in a coffin, and you see all his entrails wriggling. I must say this was pretty. I didn't think it was necessary. Because, you see, beauty or horror or anything else is in the eye of the beholder. What you think is beautiful, I might not, and vice versa, plus horror. That is why I always contend it is much better, if you can, to leave a lot to the imagination of the audience, because every audience has its imagination. But this is sort of something, as an actor, one doesn't have really any control over. You can't tell the film companies what to do. You can suggest, and we always all get together and have a go at the script and say what you'd like to do and what you'd like cut out. But they have to, in any industry, you must make money, and almost particularly in films you have to make money, because if you make money you'll make more pictures, and this is perhaps obvious. And they have to cater in films for the majority. The minority will always suffer, as in most things. And apparently in the Eastern countries, and indeed in America, they like to get their money's worth. They like to be shown. Because in, again, shall I say, the old days, in the first Frankenstein, we did what was called an Eastern version. For instance, I believe there was a part where I lop a man's head off and I put it in a basin of acid. Well, in the English version, you just saw me go like that and some smoke came up, the prop man telling you all the secrets now. But for the Irish version, as you could say, the Eastern version, you actually had a shot looking into the bath with his head disintegrating. Now it seems to be done for all stations, west, north, south and east. I don't think I've answered your question awfully well, but we had a jolly good chat.
As the lady brought up the subject of Frankenstein, has your playing of the character not toughened up over the years? It seems that he began as the frustrated idealist, and he's becoming rather more sinister himself in the later films. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I think again we come back to the writers trying to make some sort of variety. But I think, although you see each Frankenstein, how many have I done? About six? Who's counting? He's basically must be the same character. But all of us are the same character, but something had happened during the day to make you be a little more cross or a little more ruthless or a little more happy. And in these films, because he's always being so frustrated, there's always those beastly villagers saying, you know, down with Frankenstein, beating on his door. So the poor chap has to get more ruthless in the way he goes about getting his sort of do-it-yourself plastic kits, and therefore a ruthlessness comes into the character. Strange enough that you should say that in this latest one, which is yet to come out, it's only been finished a few weeks now, called Frankenstein and the Monster from Hell, to name but a few, he I think, becomes, in a way, shall we say, more human again. It's in fact, it's awfully well written. The same person who wrote the first Frankenstein picture, I believe you're seeing a clip of that, the one they showed last night, The Curse of Frankenstein. He wrote this script, which is, again, this number of years gone by. But he does, as I say, alter by the very fact of how the whoever writes the stories writes him. But he remains the same character as Frankenstein, but events and circumstances force him to be a little different. I mean, he was very ruthless, and in the one with Simon Ward, I remember, wasn't he? He was. Very ruthless. The real me came out in that.
Well, let's see an extract from The Curse of Frankenstein before the villagers started knocking on the door.
Yes.
Okay. With Robert Urquhart in The Curse of Frankenstein. We have some more questions from the audience, please. Question at the back there.
Can you account for your fondness of horror films? And
So,
can you account for your fondness or apparent fondness of horror films? And do you mind being daubed as a horror actor?
I love being adored.
Daubed, actually.
Oh, daubed!
Daubed once already.
I was daubed coming here, wasn't I? Those lovely ladies from Portsmouth. A pigeon left a message on me. No, I don't mind at all being daubed. I think, you see, in this incredibly unpredictable profession, actors are awfully lucky. They're doing a job they love, they're earning a living by it, and the end product so unused to cameras, just the end product, we hope, gives pleasure. But for any actor to be associated with any form of success, and I don't mean success naturally, actors like anyone else, we have to live, and you've got expenses, taxes and things. But to be associated with any form of success, such as I have been so lucky to be, dreadful way to end a sentence, with, I think is absolutely wonderful. If that is being daubed, I think it's the most wonderful thing that could have happened to an actor. Now, the question of being daubed, is that, am I using the right word? Yes. A horror actor. I'm an actor, horror or otherwise, you know. It's given me, on an average, I've made 1.5 pictures per year for 16 years for one film. Well, this is fantastic. Well, you know that an actor's last job is his last job. I mean, now someone asked me earlier, what are my plans? I have none. I expect, I'm pretty sure I will have, but you can never be sure, like people who have an office job, they know that they'll be going to the office from 9 till 6 and for 50 weeks out of the 52 in each year. But an actor doesn't. The job he finishes could be his last for a week, a year, 2 years, 3 years. You just don't know. So to have had this, I think one would be very ungrateful if one did object to anything one has thought of, and that it's given, obviously it's given pleasure. I mean, look at all of you here on this Sunday afternoon, which I'm so honoured and grateful that you should want to come. And this is only a small section of the, I suppose, there's millions in the world who see these pictures. No, I think it's a great, great thing. I hope I've answered your question correctly. You know, very shortly, I love it. Why am I so apparently fond of horror pictures? Yes. Well, I'm fond of anything I love, anything I do. I love my work. And when you're dealing with these pictures which are doing the impossible, you've got to believe in it and love it yourself if you're going to try and get an audience to believe it with you. So at least I approach any film I do, be it Frankenstein or Osric, Hamlet and Osric and Hamlet rather, in exactly the same way. They approach it with as serious as I say, Frankenstein I approach as seriously as if I was playing Hamlet, because it's the only way to approach any work, I think. But my fondness for anything I do, I'm glad it comes across as I am fond of it. I'm very lucky to be doing a job I love. And I'm glad it comes across.
Suggested that you started doing a series of westerns, for example. Would you miss horror?
Sorry, I didn't quite...
Would you miss horror if somebody suggested another genre film, say westerns?
Oh, no. As long as I feel I can do the part and the script is good, I will do anything. Indeed, no, it's just that this, as I think I said earlier, no one expected this incredible snowball to start rolling and go on getting bigger and bigger.
You have a question in the centre there.
You say your favourite medium is films. Last time you were sitting up there, you were talking about the possibility of a Hammer play on the stage. Any developments on that?
That was, aren't you marvellous, bless your heart, because that's a long time ago. That was Michael Carreras who said that, wasn't it? No, I haven't heard anything further in that line. I think this is Michael Carreras, who is one of the heads, as you know, of Hammer Film Productions, wants to spread his wings and open in many other media. But I think basically they will always make pictures. If they do a stage play, I don't really think a stage version of a Frankenstein or a Dracula, though there was one of Dracula, I can't quite see it coming off, because in films, as you know, there's much can be done, trick photography and all sorts of things. I don't think could quite do it on the theatre. I know I wouldn't want to appear in any stage version of it, or any stage play come to that matter of any kind, but that's purely for personal reasons. But I don't quite see them being able to do as well on the stage as you can in films, for the obvious technical reasons.
So a question, a lady on the aisle.
Well, thank you for the compliment. The dear lady said that the BBC are contemplating making another Quatermass serial, and she thought I would make a very nice... Professor Quatermass, is it? Yes. And would it appeal to me? Yes, it would. Not for television. I did a great deal of television, and again, for personal reasons, I wouldn't attempt to do television in. I'd make films for television, and this I think will eventually come. I think films will be made specifically, as one or two are now, particularly American products. I don't mean series like Cannon or The Virginian. These are made as television, what do you call them, not films, they're a television tapes. It's again a technical way you do things. But I would make good films for television. This I would like to do. I mean, our films are, as you know, shown on television. But I think if films are made particularly for television, there's going to be another very great source of work for everybody. And I think this will come. And eventually, of course, they'll come in cassettes. But I wouldn't want to appear in a television play again.
The gentleman was saying that the Hound of the Baskervilles, which we saw earlier, seemed to him a little disjointed, and as it was a Hammer film and only an A certificate, not an X, he wondered if anything had been cut out of it at all, to your knowledge.
It might be disjointed because it's like me, it's getting old. You know, you suddenly get these terrific jump cuts. It was based fairly accurately upon the Conan Doyle story. I think there were a few variations put in by the writer, but that I find a difficult question to answer. It's a long time since I've seen that picture. When I did see it originally, or read the script, indeed, I didn't find it disjointed then. So perhaps this is something that perhaps has happened in the interim of time. They might have cut it, or bits of the film might have got so old. Are you talking of having seen it very recently, or when you saw it originally? You weren't born when we did it, I'm sure. You saw it? Yeah, and you saw it in 1960? Oh, I see. So you even originally you felt it was a bit disjointed. Well, that there again, the disjointedness is in the eye of the beholder. I must say, I didn't see it myself when I read the script or played the part.
There's a mention of sacrificial rites about.
I've forgotten that. That was perhaps the bit they put in, you know, that wasn't from Mr. Doyle. Yeah.
I think it'll remain a mystery.
Yes. The funny thing is that about the Hound of the Baskervilles, which is one of Conan Doyle's very favourite stories amongst his readers, Holmes appears very, very little in it, because though he sends old Watson off to sort of find out what he can, and then he himself goes and hides on the moors for about 2 weeks, I think it is. So therefore, for those 2 weeks, you never see Holmes. He never comes into the story. He comes into the Hound of the Baskervilles less than he does in all the other stories. So this might have been another point of why it's not quite like the novel, that because I was playing Sherlock Holmes and as the leading chap, you see the leading chap's name up there, you expect to get your money's worth when you go to the cinema, and I think that wrote old Holmes up to give Cushing a bit more work in it. Bless their hearts.
Question there on the arm.
Why was the 3D process abandoned halfway through?
Oh, why was the 3D process abandoned halfway through I, Monster?
Ah! There again, you asked me a question I can't really answer. I think it just didn't work, dear boy. I don't know if any of you remember, but many years ago, they tried the 3D when we all went to the cinema and got our pair of green and red glasses. Do you remember? Put them on and you all got terrible headaches. And no one just abandoned. Then they all needed glasses because everything went fuzzy, like the start of, you know, the Osric just now. It was out of focus. This one, they shot in a different process where you could look at it, so we say, with the naked eye, if you'll pardon the expression, and you could still see the film clearly. But if you put on a pair of these glasses, you would see it in 3D. This was what they thought, but it just didn't work. And again, a technical thing which I know nothing about, apparently to get this effect, which didn't come off, but they said the only way to get this effect is for either the actors to keep on the move or the camera to keep on the move, you see. Very tiring film. But it just didn't come off, dear boy. Now, why, I don't know, because I'm no technician. And I haven't seen the picture, because it's a fairly recent one. It was made in 1971, 70. But I understand it's such a picture, because I believe I haven't seen this picture, because I've been so fortunate, as I explained earlier, so busy. Christopher gives one of his wonderful, but really excellent performances, because he plays virtually Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's a version of that famous story. And it's such a pity, because I understand because of the failure of this 3D process not working, the film gets awfully slow. Because of the cameras moving, they go past a pillar, and all the actors disappear behind a great pillar, and you hear voices going, and suddenly they appear the other side, which apparently would have looked wonderful had the pillar sort of stood out in front of you. Yeah. So I think it was not abandoned, dear boy, it just didn't work. Awful. Did you see the picture, incidentally? Yes. What did you think of it?
Very good.
I'm trying to pick up what he said, I want to hear. Yes, because it has been made so successfully so many times, hasn't it? I mean, Spencer Tracy did it. So many marvellous actors.
The Hammer one.
Yes. Had Hammer done it before?
Two Faces. Yeah. Paul Massey.
Oh yes, yes. Mm.
There's a question at the very back there.
Could you tell us a little more about your work with Christopher? You've made about 20 films.
You've made
just made them my 22nd, yes.
How did this come about? Did it start from the beginning with the first picture, or did you go into several Hamlet films together?
It came about. The first Frankenstein, you see, made this sensational and financial success that immediately Hammers decided to remake a Dracula picture in colour, and they cast Christopher as Dracula and myself as Van Helsing. And so this sort of, because of the connection with these sensational types of films, plus the fact, I'm sorry to refer so commercially to money, but as I say in industry, it is all important. The names together, rather like, say, Laurel and Hardy, or Morecambe and Wise, or Carol Lombard and William Powell, I think, or William Powell and Mona Lloyd, any teams that are good on the marquees above theatres are a very good thing to have. And it was just one of those things that came about. Christopher and I were always cast for these parts in Hammer pictures, that we have almost become a team, where now that I think our names separately mean something, but together they mean a great deal. A, for the producers to set up a picture, that is, someone said if David had a marvellous script, and he sent the script to Christopher Lee and myself to ask us if we would like to play two parts, and we both said yes. David could take that script plus our two names to a banking firm and say, look, this is the script, we've got these two actors. Will you back this picture? And in a way, whoever the two actors might be, or if you've got a big names like Kirk Douglas or Trevor Howard or anyone, if the backers, the would-be backers, know they've got a good pair of names or a good name, they're more likely to give the money to David to make his picture than they would be if David just took the script and said, this is the film I want to make and I hope to get so-and-so. So this is how I think this evolved. The Christopher Vibe. It wasn't a thing that was set out to happen. It just was one of those things that did occur, purely because of being used so much by this one firm. We have both worked independently for many other companies, but the majority of our and strangely enough, we only. I think you're the great one on numbers, Dib. I think you said 7 Frankenstein pictures, isn't it, or 6? Christopher only appeared in one of those, and I think there's about 7 Draculas, and I've only appeared in, well, it'll be 3 now, with the one that's coming up, because Christopher's played Dracula many times without me playing Van Helsing.
I'll speak to you later about my script.
You sounded like my schoolmaster.
Meanwhile, we're going to see a clip from Cash on Demand, which is one of the few films you managed to make during the 60s outside the horror.
Yes, and still for Hammer.
That was made for television originally.
It was on television first, and again, you see, Hammer made a film version of it. The film, the television, Andre Morel was in the original, it's playing the same part as he plays in this, but I forget who played my part on television. But Hammers, as I say, saw this play and thought it awfully good and bought it and did it. The same as I again said earlier, they bought, well, the latest one they're making is Love Thy Neighbour, which they're making literally at this moment. And this was what, made about 10 years ago?
In this, Peter Cushing is a martinet bank manager who finds on a visit from a security chief that all is not well. Sorry? With Andre Morel in Cash on Demand. Any more questions? On this side, and yes.
Are there any films that you particularly found shocking for you? I don't mean the repulsive, as you said in Tales from the Crypt. I mean, have you actually seen any films that actually frightened you?
The question was, has Mr. Cushing seen any films that frightened him?
Yes, I've been. When I go to the cinema, which is a great deal, so I love making pictures and I love going to see them as entertainment. And I'm a rubberneck of pictures. I mean, obviously I know a bit about them, having been in them for so long, but when I go, I don't go to sort of... I go for no other reason than to be entertained. And indeed, I've been thrilled. I paused. I was trying to think whether I was frightened. Yes, I suppose one has been. The kind of thing I think, only just this, this little bit I didn't like in the Tales from the Crypt, because it seemed to me unnecessary to see the insides of someone all writhing. But that perhaps is a question of taste. I'm trying to think. Yes, I mean, I saw recently a most wonderful picture. I wonder if any of you have seen it. It's called The Poseidon Adventure. Now, this I was absolutely riveted to my seat. I think frightened is possibly the wrong word. You see, you go to enjoy, and therefore you go through all the emotions that are going on the screen. And I wasn't I was thrilled and excited, and my whole being is for these people on this boat to be rescued. Frightened? No, I don't think so. I don't think frightened. I don't think I've ever seen any film that has caused me to be frightened.
There's a question just behind there.
Do you consider Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho a good film? I can't say it really shocked me, but I was very surprised who the villain was at the end of the film.
Was this Psycho?
Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes, Psycho. Psycho.
It did make a great deal of money, I understand.
Yes, I believe it did. No, I didn't. Now, Psycho was the one with that tall, young...
Anthony Perkins.
Anthony Perkins, yeah. Now, here's an extraordinary thing. That was one picture, one of Hitchcock's favourite pictures of mine was The Rear Window. This picture, contrary to everyone else, I didn't like very much. Now, possibly one reason was, my beloved wife and I went to see it together, and right early on, Tony Perkins' mother presumably came across the screen. I said to Helen, that's Tony Perkins dressed up as a woman. Now, this is just something that I happened to notice. And I thought right through the film, this is who it was. And of course it was, and of course ruined the whole picture for me. It wasn't that I was clever, it just happened. This could be a very unfair reason why I didn't care for the film, because I was waiting on, what's he dressed up for as his mother for? You know. But I said, I think it was very, very well made, but you can quite see why the gilt was taken off the gingerbread in that remain. It was such an obvious thing to me.
We're running a little short of time. Could we just have 3 more questions? Perhaps one from this side. Just in there. Yes.
I was interested, Mr. Cushing, in what you were saying earlier about the apparent regression in Dr. Frankenstein's character back to the kind of doctor one had in the scripts of 58 and 59. And I was wondering, with how much care Pete Blackhammer, when they were setting up a new Dracula or a new Frankenstein program, took into account the previous career of their hero, or is it just set up very much as a one-shot, another picture with no thought of what went before and what might perhaps follow after as well?
Yes, that you see, with films, people like your dear selves, there's a certain section throughout audiences in the world who will go to see all these pictures. But there are also people who will perhaps only go and see one, and then miss two or three for one reason or another. So it's very difficult for the writers to really make them as sort of chronological sequences. But Hammers have tried to, in a little way with the Frankensteins, do that. At the end of the first Frankenstein picture, you see Charlie, or Frankie, going to the gallows. Now, at the beginning of the next Frankenstein picture, which was made 3 or 4 years later, or 2 years later, you see him, how he escaped from those gallows, but it still was a film all on its own. You didn't think, well, what's he doing at the gallows? It was explained for the audiences who only saw that picture, plus those would follow it from the first one. Do you see what I mean? And then in this last one I've just done, the one rather prior to which was made 3 years ago, Frankenstein appears to be burnt alive in a building. Well, in this new one, which is yet to come out, there is a follow-up. I won't tell you because I don't want to spoil the picture, and I want you to go and see it anyway. There is a little tie-up there with that fire in the picture made 3 years ago. So in other words, they just try to cater for those who are addicts of these pictures and go to see them all the time, but at the same time to cater for the person who's going to see them for the first time. And you see, many people might not, even if they do see them all, might not see them in their chronological order. And the same, you see, with the Dracula story. Every time, see, what I love particularly about the Dracula stories is it really is a case of good after evil, and evil always being defeated in the end. But evil, as in real life, can always rise up again. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they are made in the sequence in Dracula's unending life. Or if you see, supposing Frankenstein does get killed in one of these pictures, you can still make another Frankenstein picture, because it was before he got killed. You see what I mean? I think they basically try and keep the same character, and thank heavens they keep the same actor playing it, because... and I suppose they will until he's in a wheelchair doing a Lionel Barrymore. I hope. But I think that is the problem. I think you've got to cater for those who have seen them all and will go on seeing them all, plus those who are going to see them for the first time. And I think, really, as such, they're pretty successful, wouldn't you say, from that point of view?
I think so, partly, yes. One of the problems which I've always felt rather badly about, to be honest with you, was it seemed to me that in the first Dracula, you yourself took a great deal of care over setting up the do's and don'ts, so to speak, vampire folklore. You remember the long sessions you had with your recording machine. Yet in Brides of Dracula, maybe 2 or 3 years later, your scriptwriter unfortunately decided to break off. Suddenly we have Dracula turning into a vampire bat whilst previously firmly stated and so on.
Yes.
One thing I always very much regretted.
Then you shouldn't have seen the second film, should you? Hey, got an answer for them all! I hope, dear boy.
Yes. Another question, Louis? Lady there.
Don't you think that you will one day have exhausted all the possible variations on Dracula and
Never! Yes, I think we have already. But you see, there is always I went to about 3 months ago at the classic Notting Hill Gate. They had a Peter Cushing night, which was jolly marvellous, I must say. But they showed, rather like here last night, they showed 5 pictures in which I played the leading part, and they were all directed by dear Terence Fisher. Now, I went along to do a similar thing that I'm doing now. And I was amazed, because the average audience there, I haven't had a good look at you yet, because I can't see you all, but there I saw, and I should say the average age of the audience, it was about, 25. So when we made those pictures, all those pictures they saw, they were about 5 or 6, you see. And there they all were, sitting seeing these pictures, of really vintage stuff. And these pictures are being shown apparently somewhere in the world every day. So you see, there's although the old ones are still shown, and you see old films on television and in theatres of this description, people still like to see new films. Now, there's a new audience ready to see, we hope, this new Frankenstein that has just been completed, and the new Dracula picture, which is literally only finished 10 days ago. You see, one hopes all the old fans will go and see these pictures, but there's a new lot of people who perhaps hadn't seen some of these old ones because they were only born, say, 15 years ago, and they're now old enough in this permissive age to go and see the... See, when those first were made, you couldn't go if you were this side. Children used to stick on moustaches and bowler hats to go and see them. They all got in to see them, and now anyone can. So you see, it's really like saying, look at the Westerns, and I mean, I adore Westerns, but they really are the same old story, aren't they? And if they're well done, and you've got people, I mean, I adore John Wayne and Kirk Douglas and all these marvellous actors who play the Western parts, and all the baddies in them, also Ernest Borgnine and all these people. I think you've always got an audience for something that's well made, and, bless your hearts, with possibly someone you like to go and see in that particular part.
Can we have, sorry, just one final question on this block here?
As you say, you've made many films with Terence Fisher. Could you tell us something about working with him?
I could tell you a lot, my dear. I've worked with many directors, and I loved them all, and they all had their own ways. But naturally, I have worked most with Terry, and he's the most gentle, most kind, most clever one of them all. I think this is because, you see, he's had most experience. Terry originally was an editor. Now, it helps greatly to be an editor when you become a director, because there's no waste with Terry. See, as Terry shoots, he knows what it's going to look like on the screen as far as editing the picture is concerned. Now, someone who's not an editor, you would possibly say there were 4 people in the scene who'd do a whole master shot, and then each individual actor would be taken, the close-up of him and him and him and him, and then over shoulders, and you'd take several days to do one small scene where only very small sections of all those bits of film are going to be used. Not so with Teddy. He'll take a master shot, which is the whole scene with all those actors in it, however many involved in that scene. He'll take it up to a certain point where he knows, having been an editor, where he is going to cut to a necessary close-up or insert of something to make a point that he wants to make in the picture. At the end of most filming, I should think there's a good few thousand feet of wastage. With Teddy, I should think is minuscule. There's hardly any wastage on the cutting room floor. This is a marvellous thing from the point of view of budgets, because anywhere where you can economize is a good thing. Plus the fact that with Teddy, you can take any idea at all to Teddy, and if he says, yes, this is marvellous, then you know it is. And if he says, no, this is no good, you also know it is no good, because Teddy's got one of those extraordinary minds who knows immediately what is going to be right or wrong, within the limitations of what you've got. I mean, it might not always be what any of us would want, but he just knows, and he's a great and a very dear person to work with. And the extraordinary thing was that on the last but one Frankenstein, which was made nearly 4 years ago now, the one with Simon Ward, after that, poor Terry had an accident. He was knocked down by a car and broke his leg, which took a year to heal. He got up and got better, he walked out, and exactly the same thing happened, which put him on his back for another year. So this Frankenstein, which we've just finished, was his first picture in 4 years, and he told me that he was absolutely terrified to start again. He told me this subsequently. He thought everything had gone. And when he had finished, he felt it's extraordinary that 4 years in forced rest, he had been made to look at other things, he had been made to read books, he had been made to observe other people's work for the first time that he'd had in many years to do these things. And he found it helped him enormously. And he said, without any ego, because he's of all things he's not, is an egotist. He's a very shy, sweet, dear man. He feels that this new Frankenstein, as far as he is concerned, is the best picture he's done. Now, Teddy wouldn't say a thing like that unless he really felt it and meant it. And I hope that when you all see it, as I do hope you will agree with him.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time.
I appreciate your coming very, very much indeed, and for having me. God bless you.
Thank you.